something like this, and the person inside reproduced something like this, which has absolutely no correspondence with what the person outside had drawn. And in both the cases, imaging data was acquired. So the telepathy experiment itself can be said. I mean, mentalists do it all the time. I mean, if you have gone to any show, there is one show in Las Vegas. There is one mentalist, and he does amazing things. You might have seen people do such kind of things, claiming that they have telepathic experience. The main thing in this study was they actually got brain imaging data while they were going through this process. And if you look at the regions of the brain activated during successful telepathy and unsuccessful telepathy, they are different. And there are different explanations for why this particular region was activated. This is in the temporal lobe, and I'm going to come to temporal lobe later. So this is in the temporal lobe, and what is its functions and how it might aid in this person in telepathy and all those things. But this is a really interesting case study showing how science can be used to investigate some of these matters. Let's look at some of the population studies, wherein people have looked at large number of people doing the same thing, and then where you can do statistics and get results which you can fairly confidently say is not due to chance. Okay. A large amount of literature on mind wandering and meditation. Okay. So this is a very famous paper in the Frontiers in Psychology by Klaus Bernstein in Denmark, who kind of took Patanjali's sayings like yoga, chitta vritti nirodha, and many others, and tried to put it within a neuroscientific research framework. Okay, and many people have followed up on that. And I'm going to talk about one research study here. Reduced mind wandering in experienced meditators and associated EEG correlates. So this is EEG study, not fMRI. So this was done in large number of subjects. And what you can see here is the meditation depth. So the blue is the expert meditators, red is the non-expert meditators. Meditation depth of expert meditators increased with time. Mind wandering of expert meditators decreased with time more than it did for non-expert meditators. And sleepiness, unfortunately for non-experts, increased with time, and for experts it decreased with time. Okay, and there were clear differences in EEG scalp topography between mind wandering and meditation. So, and the differences were also, I cannot go into the neuroscience of that, lack of time. The difference is also kind of complementary, saying that meditation is kind of it's exactly what mind wandering is not. So really tells that yoga, chitta vritti nirodha has some resonance here. Okay, I'm going to briefly talk about this, a lot of literature on this, but really it's just observations. We don't know why this happens, something known as the Geschwind syndrome. Some subjects, and if you're interested, you can go and look at this paper in the British Journal of Psychiatry, published by Royal Society. Some subjects with brain injury suddenly become religious and have spontaneous spiritual experiences in altered states of consciousness. And sometimes, and people hypothesize that this is because brain injury, especially in the temporal cortex, the same region which was activated during telepathy, brain injuries to that region can create hypersynchronization. So what happens is, due to that injury, there's a lot of information transfer between different parts of the brain, and this hypersynchronization is the reason for vivid experiences and heightened level of consciousness. We really don't know much about this, so I'm just putting it out there, but I won't go deeper into that. Having talked about meditation, let's talk about mantra and chanting, because meditation is probably not for everybody. Many people, not just in India but even elsewhere, they rely on chanting. Even here there have been structural and functional studies. So this is an interesting structural study which was done in Houston in New York and published in Frontiers in Human Neuroscience. So what they did was look at cortical thickness. I was talking about how thick the cortex is, and it goes down with age and all those things. So same cortical thickness, but in Vedic priests who had certain amount of experience with mantra and chanting, and they had a control group which was similar to the Vedic priest group in every other respects, but for the fact that they did not chant Vedas. Okay? And what they found was higher cortical thickness in certain regions of the brain, including the frontal and the temporal lobes. The temporal lobe is the one that I was referring to, is important for spirituality. The frontal lobe is important for higher cognition and altered states of consciousness. So they found this increased cortical thickness due to Veda chanting. This is an observation. So it's really not a mechanistic model for why this is so. Okay, I mean, this is a very recent paper. So this is an observation. And next people are going to make further experiments and collect more data and come up with a theory on why this might be so. And that has still not happened. Functional, this paper in 2015 made some news. It was, study was done in Israel. Jews do a lot of chanting, and they call it repetitive speech for lack of a better word. And interestingly, what they found is this chanting, so it's really not the content of, so they're really not looking at what kind of repetitive speech it is, but it's just that putting your mind on the same thing again and again and telling it out. These processes induce large-scale deactivation in the brain. And deactivation is sometimes good, and I'm going to talk about that later, because there are certain, especially regions which are involved in emotion, which is called the limbic regions. They tend to be activated more than what is required in normal life. So if you deactivate that, it has a calming, relaxing effect, which probably helps you concentrate better. So that is one of the papers recently, and they call this the mantra effect. So it would be interesting to see what happens. The same is done with different types of mantras that we have. Okay, in that direction, I was involved in a study looking at the mental health benefits of Om chanting, and this was in collaboration with Immense. So the hypothesis here was that there is an invasive procedure called vagal nerve stimulation. So there's a vagus nerve which goes behind your back, and vagus nerve is connected to those regions of the brain which induce hyperarousal and anxiety. Okay, and by actually opening up the vagus nerve using local anesthesia, by stimulating the vagus nerve, especially in patients with psychiatric disorders, you can reduce their anxiety and stress levels. This has been there. The hypothesis is that the vagal nerve stimulation type of deactivation can be induced by Om chanting, and I'm going to get to why that might be the case. So the experiment was done actually here in Immense, and I analyzed the data. So there was 15 seconds of rest where the subjects were being scanned, they did not hear anything. 15 seconds of Om, then 15 seconds they said Om, 15 seconds they did not do anything, and the last 15 seconds they did S. It's a control condition. So control condition because we want to subtract out all the neural processes that are involved in just generating a sound. Okay, so Om is a nasal sound and this is a non-nasal sound. So that way that was taken as a control condition. So if you take the brain response to Om and the brain response to S and subtract it out, then you see what is the brain response just specific to Omkara, right? And we also did what is known as connectivity analysis. I was talking about not just how different regions of the brain activate or deactivate, but how they talk to each other. Okay, that is very important. Like you might have a PC here and another PC somewhere else, but when you connect all of them, you get the internet. And the power of that is much larger than the power of these individual nodes. So that's the concept behind distributed information processing. So we want to look at how these different regions, called the limbic regions in the brain, which become hyperactivated, hyper-aroused in these psychiatric disorders leading to anxiety and stress. How connectivity between them increases or decreases with Om chanting with respect to both resting condition and this chanting. So this is with respect to resting condition. We found certain decreases in connectivity. Om with respect to rest. The rest is not a very good control condition. So when you look at Om with respect to this chanting, large scale decrease in connectivity, which means all these regions which are creating stress in your brain, they start talking to each other a little bit less. Okay, that's what this means in layman's terms. And that is going to induce some amount of, that's going to have some amount of de-stressing effect. And we still have theories about why this might be the case, and it's not conclusively proven. The theory is that Omkara has some kind of a vibration. There is also a primary component in Omkara, and that creates some kind of a vibration, and that mimics the effect of vagal nerve stimulation. So that's a theory, and further studies would have to be done in order to confirm whether that is true or false. So another example of how you can use scientific methods to ask questions which come within the purview of mysticism. Let's move ahead and talk a little bit about breathing, because a lot of work has been done about breathing techniques, pranayama and all those things. I don't have time to go into much detail about all of them, but what is known, and this was a very influential paper regarding nasal airflow in brain activity, is there a link? And they synthesize literature from various sources and come up with this model wherein brain activity actually induces differences in how much you breathe through in each nostril over the course of the day. And that's because the brain rhythms between the left and right brain keep changing. It's called an ultradian rhythm. And this happens without your knowledge. However, it's not completely involuntary. You can actually voluntarily close one of the nose and decide to perform uninostril breathing. What happens then is shown here. When you do uninostril breathing, it can actually, that effect, there is something known as trigeminal nerves endings in the nose, and that can go into the spinal trigeminal nucleus, from there to the brainstem, and from there to the cortex. And that can introduce changes in brain rhythms between the left and the right in your brain. And that has been shown to have a lot of benefits with regard to cognitive processing and in processing speed. Okay. I do want to show one really elegant study that was published in the International Journal of Yoga, performed by a team at YesYasa here in Bangalore. So, effect of uninostril yoga breathing on brain hemodynamics. So this doesn't use fMRI, it uses another technique called functional near infrared spectroscopy, which is kind of similar, looking at hemodynamics. So subjects did either left uninostril breathing or right uninostril breathing. So either you are breathing through left nostril or right nostril. And they obtained data both before and during this process. What's interesting is they found, and this is the left prefrontal cortex and right prefrontal cortex. When they're doing the left breathing, left uninostril breathing, the activity goes down. While they're doing the right uninostril breathing, the blue, the activity goes up. Okay, this is very counterintuitive, given the current state of knowledge about how these things work. What I liked about the papers, they substantiate this both using Ayurveda and modern science. In Ayurveda, it is known that uninostril yogic breathing, where the left uninostril breathing is called Chandra Anulom Vilom, and the right, and it has a calming and relaxing effect because it is Chandra, or rather, they named it as Chandra because it has a calming and relaxing effect. And the right uninostril breathing is Surya Anulom Vilom, and it has an activating and energizing effect. So maybe they were named as Surya and Chandra because of these effects. Okay, it does. So these results, they do correlate with what is shown in Ayurveda. And also the authors, give a putative model of how this can be true, even from the modern medical science point of view. Okay, I'm going to quickly go into religiosity and then probably finish this. When you talk about religiosity, it's slightly different. It's not spirituality, because spirituality kind of, you don't have to believe in a lot of religious things in order to be spiritual. But religiosity is basically believing in a lot of tenets in specific religions. So what is interesting is civilizations which developed in isolation, like the Aborigines in Australia, did not have any contact outside. They also have the concept of God. Okay? So the question is there a biological basis for religion? Is something in how our brains are wired compels us to at least hypothesize the existence of a supernatural power? That is the question. Now, to answer this question is kind of hard, but we did a study which at least gives some insights into this question. So the question is really whether there is a biological or an evolutionary basis for religion. So there were two groups of subjects. One group was highly religious, the other was highly non-religious. Both of them underwent fMRI scans. And the data was acquired at National Institute of Health, and we analyzed it, and it was published in 2014 in Brain Connectivity. Instead of going through all the technical details of the study, I'll show a news clip that came in the media regarding that. That would give you some insight into what we did.
Researchers at Auburn University are exploring the link between a person's brain and how religious they are. All new at 11 tonight, News 9's Addie Hubble explains this theory and why it may pose more questions for this part of the South's Bible Belt in the future. Annie?
Years ago, the National Institute of Health in Baltimore posed the question, how does the brain shape a person's religious beliefs?
They did basically was to recruit some subjects who self-identified themselves as like highly religious and non-religious. And what they did was to get functional MRI images of the brain and see which regions of the brain were activated for 3 dimensions of religion that they described.
When the NIH could not find any differences, Deshpande hypothesized that it's not the difference in how brain regions are activated, but how each region communicates with each other when they are processing religious information. He later found his hypothesis was correct.
What we found interestingly was, as you can see here, this brain region, the connection between these 2 brain regions in the frontal cortex, which is highly expanded in humans, were actually stronger in religious people as compared to non-religious people. And this region is used by humans for decoding the intentions of others.
The fact that this pattern is stronger in religious people indicates that they are able to engage this brain network to attribute things to some kind of higher supernatural power. Deshpande says the next step is to figure out how genetics or environmental factors like your upbringing may influence how religious you are.
It's really not possible to say whether, God exists or not, or whether there is actually religion, scientific or not. I mean, those are much broader questions. And I think with time, once we answer these narrow scientific questions and build up our knowledge in this field, hopefully one day we'll be able to answer those broader questions.
Some very interesting research to view the team's
So, another interesting study looking at the effect of religious prayer, and what they showed was the region of the brain known as the caudate, which is involved in bliss. Anytime you feel good, you eat something good, that region of the brain gets activated. It was also activated during religious prayer. And I want to, I'll just briefly touch upon this. This is a really interesting question. This is not a brain study, but I still wanted to bring it up. Is religiosity useful? If you say that it has an evolutionary basis, it must be useful for the survival of the organism. Any trait, so in evolution, any trait which is useful for the long-term survival of the organism kind of gets passed on, and those that are not useful they don't get passed on. It's use it or lose it and survival of the fittest. That's how evolution works. So then the question comes, if it does have an evolutionary basis, it must be inherently useful to the survival of the organism. And this is a recent paper in 2015, Journal of Reward Deficiency Syndrome and Addiction Science. So what they did was look at remission of addiction, which is basically whether addicts stop taking the drug that they are addicted to, okay? And they looked at this remission in both religious and non-religious people. And you can see here, all these blue lines are non-religious people who said that belief was not important, attending service was not important, religious reading was, they did not do much of it, they did not watch religious television, they did not meditate or pray. And that's all the green, and who said that was not important, and all the gray is who said it's very important for all of these, so they are religious people. And this is just an observation. I'm not claiming why, I don't know why this is so, but it just shows that the remission rates for religious people are much higher. I don't know, maybe because they fear God, or maybe because of some other reason. We don't have a theory to explain this observation. But this is a valid observation, and if they are able, so if they are able to control themselves, not to go back to their addiction, it shows higher cognitive control. And higher cognitive control inherently increases the survival of the organism. So this buttress the point that religiosity probably has an evolutionary basis and probably is useful for the survival of the organism. Okay. I will, due to paucity of time, I will skip the brain-body thing. The only point I would want to make is that we cannot see the brain in isolation. We talked so much about brain and mysticism. The brain is connected to the body through multiple pathways, and the body can influence the brain through multiple pathways. What you eat, what you do is very important, because all of these things affect the brain. Okay? And what kind of mood you are in affects your body. So the brain-body relationship is very intricate, and all of these things, I mean, this is an excellent paper. If you're interested in this question, very influential journal, The Embodied Mind, a review on functional, genomic and neurological correlates of mind-body therapies. You can look at that paper if you're interested, but this is also an emerging frontier. Maybe it's for some other day. With that, I'm not going to talk about this as well. So this basically just says that your genetics can change if you constantly go to a higher state of consciousness. So this has nothing to do with the brain. It's a brain-body question. Basically, your DNA does change, and this was published in 2012. There are changes in DNA and DNA expression if a person constantly attains higher levels of consciousness. Okay. I think with that I want to close with some acknowledgements, and then maybe we can have some questions if any of you have any questions. Basically, many people have helped my research. Advisors, students, many people in the scientific community, many institutions, National Institute of Health, the US Department of Defense, received money from a lot of different people. And it's really not possible to do this kind of research without all the human resources and financial resources. But none of this would have materialized without the insight and inspiration provided by Sri Ranga Mahaguru and Srimati Vijaya Lakshmi Srimati. And I'll explain why. And he's the founding president, and she's the current president of Ashtanga Yoga Vijnana Mandiram. And I don't say this without reason. And the reason being that Sri Ranga Mahaguru proposed this particular paradigm for understanding mysticism. And the paradigm is as follows. In Kannada, Vishaya, Prayoga and Anubhava. And if I loosely translate this to English, Vishaya is your hypothesis. Prayoga is your experiment or observation. And Anubhava is your inference or experience. And we are following this kind of a framework today in order to investigate some of these questions. What is remarkable is that he made this proposal in the earlier part of the 20th century, when science and mysticism were considered as totally incompatible with each other. I mean, they were considered to be incompatible even 20 years ago. And critical questioning and inquiry were considered unacceptable in religious circles. So, I mean, a lot of people have approached mysticism from a lot of different angles, and I don't want to critique what other people have done, but I think this was a very path-breaking framework to propose at that time, and it is still relevant today. And this has been the inspiration for me to take this up as my research in my career, and so I really want to acknowledge their influence on me. Okay, I think that's the end of the talk. I would welcome any questions.
Study being done with reference to the religious prayers for the Muslims?
Yes. Because you asked, I can show you. Sure, okay. So the question was, has any study been done regarding prayers with Muslims? Studies have been done regarding almost everything that you can imagine. And this is, I mean, due to paucity of time, I did not talk about this. This is a study regarding the effects of Muslims praying, or what is called as salat, on EEG gamma activity. The EEG gamma activity is basically one certain type of activity. What they did was, so as you can see here, these are the 4 steps, physical steps that they use while performing namaz. They had 2 different experiments, and same persons did these steps, carried out these steps 2 different ways. The first way, they did it the normal way. Just basically they carry out these steps, they recite some verses, and also apply their mind into what they are doing. In the second experiment, they just did the physical steps, did not apply their mind. Okay, and there was a difference in EEG gamma activity between these 2 conditions. And the authors, what the authors say is that even though what you do physically, which is basically what we call karma, can be important, can help in you achieving a state of mind, that it can be poshaka, but if the mind is not there, if you just do the karma, it doesn't have as much as of an effect on your state of consciousness as it would have when you actually have your mind in it. So there are other studies that people have done, but since you asked that question, I just wanted to show this.
Any reference?
Yeah, the reference is this paper in Complementary Therapies in Clinical Practice, 2016, volume 24, page 6 to 10.
I have a question.
Okay.
Most of the Indian systems of philosophy, they have different concepts of brain. Particularly, for example, Sankhya, it speaks of buddhi at the highest level, ahankara and manas. Is there any such validation of these differences in components of mind?
The problem here is one of terminology. Okay, So buddhi, ahankara and manas means something in our terminology. There aren't equivalent things for buddhi and manas in brain science. There is for ahankara, and it is called self. So how is self constructed? How do you get the sense of self? Why is your sense of self, why does it go away when you get an anesthetic, for example? These kinds of investigations have been done. And loosely, there are investigations about what is known as a decision-making circuit in the brain that can loosely correspond to buddhi, right? So if a group of Sankhya experts and a group of neuroscientists sat together and talked to each other, I am sure this can be resolved.
Very well answered. Now, I have one request to make to the audience. I hope everybody has signed. Is the register passing through everybody? So if it has stopped somewhere, please pass it on so that everybody puts his signature. So you have a question to ask, please.
Good evening. Thank you for the very illuminating talk. I will quickly share an experience which I believe will be of value to the audience and seek your opinion on it. I hope that's okay. It will take me a minute to share the experience. My cousin is the professor of MRI at the All India Institute of Medical Sciences, and we did this experiment about 20 years ago with the 1.5 Tesla MRI machine. So I was both the subject and the object, in terms of conceiving the experiment. So we initially mapped the 5 neurotransmitters which are responsible for higher order thinking, which is basically acetylcholine and so on and so forth. I'm not too familiar with the terminology. And we took, and I was mapped, so we took the spectrum of the neurochemicals, and we found that there were differences in the heights because they were not of the same concentration. And then the experiment actually began without the usual ritualism associated with the chanting of the Gayatri Mantra, which is Sandhya Vandanam. I started chanting the Gayatri Mantra whenever I had an opportunity, while driving the car and while doing any other work. And her machine was available on every Friday, so we took weekly measurements. And over a period of 6 weeks, we found that the spectra became equal. And then, of course, I stopped chanting, and we found that over a period of another 6 to 8 weeks, it just got back to the original state that it was. So we had presented this at the International Cognitive Sciences Congress organized by NIIT many years ago, and we said it's a case study. The subject is only one, a believer, and we just conjectured that while there will be no explanation given by modern science as to what the equalization of the spectra means, but we said that in the Indian Mantra Shastra there is an explanation for this, which is that for every syllable that we have in a mantra, the formula is that you have to chant it 1 lakh times. So if it's a Panchakshari like Om Namah Shivaya, 5 lakh times. Gayatri, which I chanted, is 24 lakh times. So what's your opinion here, sir?
Well, if you made an observation, I believe that it is true. Definitely publishable because it is a repeated measures experiment. It was done on the same subject. So, what before and after forms a control. I really don't know what could be the theory behind this. I mean, only last 3 or 4 years, this mantra effect, what happens